inflammatory breast cancer patients were upstaged, meaning they found evidence of metastatic disease on PET imaging versus conventional imaging versus only 50% of those patients who had locally advanced breast cancer. In addition, they found lymph nodes outside of the field, of the local field on PET imaging, more so in IBC than locally advanced breast cancer, and they found more distant metastasis, as I spoke of, primarily bone-only disease. And that's actually demonstrated here. I'm not going to point, but you can see the bone scan looks totally negative. And yet you can see on PET imaging, there is an isolated bone metastases in this person who had IBC. And so PET imaging was found to be very important in inflammatory breast cancer, more so than locally advanced disease. So we have this concept of limited stage metastatic disease, bone-only disease, but we also have this issue that the regional nodal drainage of inflammatory breast cancer can be more diffuse than locally advanced disease. And we all feel that local spread through lymphatics is curable versus hematogenous spread to lymph nodes. And so this is a beautiful example from the Dana-Farber. You can see on PET imaging at the bottom that you have enhancement in the breast, that's an IBC patient. You have ipsilateral, that's on the left, ipsilateral nodal involvement, and on the right, you have contralateral nodal involvement. And so that person is stage 4, supposedly incurable, but the question is that contralateral lymph node involved because of hematogenous spread or lymphatic spread? And so Wendy actually and her colleagues from MD Anderson identified 140 inflammatory breast cancer patients, and actually almost a third of them had contralateral lymph node involvement. And 13% did not have any other distant involvement, only contralateral lymph node involvement. So the question is, are those patients curable? Should we go for cure with limited metastatic stage disease? It's something to think about. And so what do we think about as a group? Well, PET-CT, again, is becoming standard imaging technique for these newly diagnosed breast cancer patients. It finds distant nodal spread and limited bone involvement, and the question is, are these patients potentially curable, in which case they need to be treated quite aggressively. So how do we define limited inflammatory breast cancer? Is it extensive nodal involvement, assuming that the lymph nodes are involved through lymphatic drainage, not hematogenous spread? And then, what do we do if we find limited bone involvement? Bone involvement only seen on PET, possibly MRI, but too small to biopsy. So you can never really prove it. You can just see it on PET, not even bone scan. Should those patients be considered limited or at least aggressively treated? And I think it's something that we need to think about because the biology of this disease seems to be different than non-IBC. And what do? We need a collaborative approach in order to arrive at this answer. And so where are we with this? Well, to me, we're in a crisis. I would like to actually get an answer to this question before I retire, and that's not too long from now. But we do have good current efforts, and this is our current effort. This is the International Inflammatory Breast Cancer Consortium. And again, this is a collaboration of researchers, advocates, and clinicians to help answer therapeutic questions much more rapidly than individual institutions. So we may be able to say what is limited IBC and how do we approach that? What is extensive stage IBC and how do we approach that? What are the diagnostic criteria for IBC? So that's what we're doing right now. What about the future? There is actually an IBC focus group which was convened by the Susan G. Komen Inflammatory Breast Cancer Research Foundation and the Milberg Foundation. This was a small group of advocates, researchers, and clinicians who basically got together with the goal to discuss research and improve the outcomes of IBC. But it became very evident at the beginning that in order to improve the outcomes of IBC, you need to define what IBC is. And so that is the current focus of the group, is trying to come up with some framework for diagnosing IBC and then give it to the general population, see whether it can be validated, so that we aren't using the same 8 criteria from 1978 to define this disease. So I want you to sort of open up your mind about what you think and how you think diagnostic criteria should be with IBC. Think about limited IBC and what we should do for treatment, because this is why we're here to come up with some decisions. So, thank you.